The twin amber moons of Ossian cast long shadows across the dusty streets of the colony's main settlement. Captain Rex Thorne squinted against the harsh glare of the setting sun as he made his way through the crowded marketplace. After 15 years of service in the Galactic Peacekeeping Force, he had seen his fair share of backwater outposts, but Ossian took the prize for being the most desolate. "Another day in paradise," he muttered, adjusting the holster at his hip. The situation on Ossian had deteriorated rapidly in the past months. What had started as small protests against colonial policies had escalated into a full-blown insurgency, with the Ossian Liberation Front making increasingly bold moves against the colonial government. His mission was simple on paper: stabilize the situation, gather intelligence on the rebel leadership, and pave the way for a diplomatic resolution. Simple on paper, but messy in reality, as things always were. As he navigated through the marketplace, he became aware of a presence trailing him. Not threatening, clumsy, in fact, but persistent. He turned sharply down an alley, then spun around to face his follower. A young Axionite girl stumbled into view, clearly startled by his sudden maneuver. She couldn't have been more than 16 or 17 by human standards, with the characteristic silver-white hair and orange-tinted skin of her species. Her eyes, large and violet, widened in surprise. "Why are you following me?" Thorne demanded, his voice gruff from years of command. The girl straightened her posture, tried to appear older than she was. "I wasn't following you. I was observing." Despite himself, Thorne almost smiled. Observing is just a fancier word for following. "I'm Ionra," she said, extending a slender hand in the human manner, though the gesture was clearly practiced rather than natural. "And you're Captain Thorne of the Peacekeepers, sent to fix our problems." He ignored her hand. "You shouldn't be out alone, especially not trailing military personnel. There's a curfew in place for your own safety." "The curfew doesn't apply to me," she replied with a confidence that surprised him. "My father works with the governor. He's on the Colonial Council." Thorne sized her up. Daughter of a council member explained the quality of her clothes and her boldness, but not her interest in him. "What do you want, Ionra?" "I want to help," she said simply. "I know things about the ALF that could be useful to you." "I doubt that." Her eyes flashed with indignation. "I hear things at my father's meetings. Council members talk freely around me because they think I'm just a child who doesn't understand. Maybe they're right." "They're not," she insisted. "I know that Commander Sella is secretly meeting with ALF representatives at the old temple ruins." "I know that." "Stop." Thorne cut her off. "If you have information, take it to the proper channels." "They won't listen to me." "And you think I will?" He shook his head. "Go home, kid. This isn't a game." But Ionra was persistent. Over the next few days, she appeared wherever Thorne went. Outside his barracks, at the Colonial Administration Building, even at the small cantina where he occasionally took his meals. Each time with some new piece of information, some new offer to help. Her earnestness was almost endearing, if it hadn't been so irritating. Then came the day when everything changed. Thorne was preparing to lead a reconnaissance mission to the Southern Highlands, where intelligence suggested an ALF weapons cache might be located. As he briefed his small team in a secure room at headquarters, the door burst open, and Ionra rushed in. "You can't go to the Highlands today," she blurted out, breathless. "It's a trap. They know you're coming." Major Foster, Thorne's second-in-command, immediately drew his weapon. "How the hell did you get in here? This is a restricted area." Thorne signaled Foster to stand down. "How did you know about this mission? Who told you?" "I overheard it." "That's not important," Ionra insisted. "What's important is that the ALF has planted explosives along the valley path. They're expecting you." "And how exactly do you know this?" Thor demanded. "I have friends whose siblings are with the ALF. I listen. Please, you have to believe me." Foster scoffed. "Captain, we can't delay a mission based on the ramblings of a teenage alien with a crush." Ionra's orange skin darkened with what Thorne recognized as an Axionite blush, but her gaze remained determined. "I'm not making this up. I'm trying to save your lives." Thorne studied her for a long moment. There was something in her eyes, a sincerity that gave him pause. "I'm coming with you," she announced suddenly. "I could show you a different route, one they won't be watching." "Absolutely not," Thorne replied firmly. But I can help. No, he said, his voice harder than he intended. This isn't some adolescent adventure. This is war. People die. You be a liability. I wouldn't. Ionra, listen to me. Thorn cut her off, his patience finally exhausted. You're a child playing at being a spy. You have no training, no experience, and you're going to get yourself killed, or worse, get my men killed. Go home. Come back when you're older, then maybe we'll talk. The hurt in her eyes was immediate and profound. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked her age, young, vulnerable, and completely out of her depth. Without another word, she turned and fled the room. Good riddance, Fosta muttered. But Thorn felt an unexpected twinge of regret at his harshness. Still, it was necessary. The best thing for her was to stay far away from the conflict, from the danger, from him. The mission proceeded, with a change of route despite Foster's objections, and Thorn discovered that Ionra had been right. Reconnaissance drones detected explosive devices planted along their originally planned path. How she had known remained a mystery, but her information had saved lives. By the time he returned to thank her, however, he learned that she had left the colony with her father for the Axionite capital city. Thorn finished his assignment on Ashian 3 months later, having brokered a tenuous ceasefire between the colonial government and the more moderate factions of the Alph. As his transport lifted off from the dusty surface, he found himself thinking of the strange, earnest Axionite girl who had been so determined to help. A passing thought, nothing more, soon buried beneath the demands of new assignments and new conflicts across the galaxy. 5 years passed. The situation on Ashian had deteriorated once again, this time more severely. The ceasefire had collapsed within a year, and the Alph had grown significantly in both numbers and firepower. Rumors of outside involvement, possibly from the Draconian Empire, had reached Galactic Peacekeeping Command, and Thorn, now a veteran of 3 more planetary conflicts, had been dispatched to assess the situation. Captain Thorn, welcome back to Ashian. The new colonial governor, a stern woman named Eliza Weston, greeted him as he entered the administration building. Though I wish it were under better circumstances. It's commander now, Thorn corrected her mildly, and I doubt there will ever be good circumstances on this rock. Perhaps not, but we're on the verge of something approaching a breakthrough, Weston replied, leading him toward the council chambers. The Alph has agreed to formal negotiations for the first time. Thorn raised an eyebrow. And you believe them? I believe in the person who brokered the meeting. She's proven to be a valuable intermediary with exceptional diplomatic skills. Weston pushed open the doors to the council chambers, where several people, both human and Axionite, were already seated around a large table. Thorn scanned the room automatically, assessing each person for potential threats. His gaze stopped on a figure at the far end of the table. At first, he couldn't place why she caught his attention. An Axionite woman, tall and poised, with the characteristic silver-white hair pulled back in an elegant knot. She wore formal attire, a blend of traditional Axionite designs with modern influences. Her orange-tinted skin was darker than most of her kind, suggesting significant time spent under the harsh Ashian sun. Then she turned, and violet eyes met his. Recognition hit him like a physical blow. Ionra, but not the awkward teenager who had trailed him through the marketplace 5 years ago. This was a woman grown, confident, and composed, with an air of quiet authority that commanded respect. Commander Thorn, Governor Weston said, may I introduce Ionra Ventau, our chief negotiator with the Alph. We've met. Ionra said, her voice deeper and more measured than he remembered. Though it's been some time, Thorn managed to recover his composure. Indeed, you were considerably shorter then. A hint of amusement flickered in her eyes. And you were considerably less diplomatic. The meeting proceeded, with Thorn being briefed on the current situation. The Alph had grown more organized, better armed, and increasingly radical in their demands. Attacks on colonial infrastructure had increased threefold in the past year. Yet, mysteriously, they had reached out through intermediaries expressing interest in negotiations. Throughout the briefing, Thorn found his attention repeatedly drawn to Ionra. She spoke with knowledge and insight, outlining the various factions within the Alf, their demands, and the potential avenues for compromise. Gone was the impulsive girl who had burst into his briefing room. In her place was a shrewd diplomat with a nuanced understanding of the complex political landscape. When the meeting concluded, Thorn lingered, waiting until the others had filed out. Ionra remained as well, arranging her notes. With deliberate care. Ionra Vental, he said, testing the name. A bit more formal than Ionra. Ionra is a childhood name, she replied without looking up. I thought it was time for something more befitting my position. And what position is that, exactly? When I left, you were a counselor's daughter with an overactive imagination. Now she did look up, her violet eyes sharp. When you left, I was a naive girl who thought that good intentions were enough to make a difference. I've learned better since then. Clearly, he gestured to the empty council chamber. Chief negotiator is quite an achievement for someone so young. I'm not as young as you seem to remember, Commander. There was a certain emphasis on his rank. I've spent the last 5 years earning this position. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, laden with unspoken words. I didn't expect to see you again, Thorn finally admitted. Didn't you? Ionra gathered her notes and stood. As I recall, you told me to come back when I was older. Well, here I am. The directness of her statement caught him off guard. I didn't mean... Dinner, she interrupted. Tonight. My residence. There are things discussed in today's meeting that require further explanation, away from certain years. She handed him a small data chip, the address and security codes. 7 o'clock local time. Before he could respond, she swept past him and out of the chamber, leaving behind a subtle scent of Ashian desert flowers. Thorn stared at the data chip in his hand, unsure what had just happened. The confident woman who had just left bore little resemblance to the girl he remembered, yet there was something in her eyes, something that hinted at unfinished business between them. Against his better judgment, he found himself at her door that evening. Ionra's residence was on the outskirts of the colony, a modern structure built in harmony with the desert landscape. The security was impressive, military-grade, far beyond what a civilian diplomat would typically employ. She opened the door herself, dressed more casually than she had been at the meeting, though still elegantly. Commander, punctual as ever. Force of habit, he replied, following her inside. The interior was spacious and tastefully appointed, with a blend of Axionite artifacts and more contemporary furnishings. One wall was entirely transparent, offering a breathtaking view of the desert and the twin moons rising over the distant mountains. Drink, she offered, moving to a cabinet near a small, intimate dining area where a table was already set for two. I shouldn't. I'm technically on duty. You're always on duty, Thorn. That hasn't changed. She poured 2 glasses of what appeared to be Terran whiskey. But I suspect you can make an exception this once. He accepted the glass, noting the way she had dropped his rank. You seem to know me well. I made a study of you, she admitted, without a trace of the embarrassment her younger self might have shown. After you left, I wanted to understand what kind of man could dismiss me so easily. The statement hung in the air between them, neither accusation nor compliment. And what did you conclude? He asked, genuinely curious. That you were a man who valued competence above all else. She gestured for him to sit at the table. So I became competent. As they ate, Ionra filled in the gaps of the past 5 years. After leaving Ashian with her father, she had pursued education on 3 different planets, focusing on interspecies diplomacy and conflict resolution. She had returned to Ashian 2 years ago as an aide to the previous negotiator, then taken over the position when he was recalled. That's the official version, Thorn noted. What's the real story? Ionra's violet eyes studied him over the rim of her glass. Perceptive. Perhaps I underestimated you. I doubt it. You don't strike me as someone who underestimates people these days. A small smile curved her lips. No, I don't. She set down her glass. The real story is more complicated. She rose from the table and moved to a concealed panel in the wall. After pressing her palm against it, a hidden compartment slid open, revealing a sophisticated communications array. What I'm about to tell you, she said, is known to exactly 3 people in the galaxy. For counting you. Thorn's instincts went on high alert. And why would you share it with me? Because I need your help, and because despite everything, I trust you. She activated the array, and a series of encrypted documents appeared on the display. I'm not just a negotiator, Thorn. I'm an operative for galactic security. Deep cover. He stared at her, reassessing everything he thought he knew. For how long? Since 6 months after you left Ashian. They recruited me during my studies on Earth. Apparently, my unique perspective and natural aptitude for gathering information caught their attention. There was a hint of irony in her voice. And your mission? Initially, to monitor the growing influence of the Syndicate in this sector. But over the past year, it's evolved. She brought up a series of surveillance images. The ALF is being manipulated by outside forces. Not just the Syndicate, but the Draconian Empire. Thorn leaned closer to examine the images. They showed various meetings between ALF leaders and off-worlders, weapon shipments, and training camps. This goes far beyond a local insurgency, Ionra continued. The Draconians are using Ashian as a testing ground, both for new weapons technology and for destabilization tactics they plan to deploy throughout the sector. Why not bring this to the governor? To your superiors in galactic security? Because there are leaks in both organizations. Her expression was grim. Information I've passed through official channels has repeatedly found its way to the enemy. Someone high up is compromised, and that's why you've approached me? Partly. She met his gaze directly. I need someone with your combat experience and tactical knowledge. Someone outside the established command structure here. Someone who isn't compromised. That's a lot of faith to put in someone who, by your own admission, dismissed you years ago. I've had 5 years to get over that particular wound, she replied with a wry smile. And I've been monitoring your career. You're many things, Thorn, but you're not corrupt, and you're not easily fooled. He finished his drink, considering her words. What exactly are you proposing? The negotiations are real, but they're also a cover. While the diplomats talk, we need to uncover the full extent of Draconian involvement and stop whatever they're planning. She hesitated, then added, but to do that, we need access to places I can't go alone. And how do you propose we get that access? We give them what they expect to see. She stepped closer, her expression serious. A human officer, disillusioned with colonial policies, being turned by a sympathetic Axionite diplomat. Me. Thorn raised an eyebrow. You want us to pretend to be, what, collaborators? More than that, she said quietly. Lovers. The word hung in the air between them, charged with implications. That's your plan? He asked, incredulous. To pretend we're having an affair? It's an effective cover, she argued. Personal relationships are the one thing people rarely question too deeply. It explains why we're spending time together, why we might be seen in places we shouldn't be. And it gives you a plausible reason for showing interest in ALF activities. It's risky. If we're caught, we're dead regardless of our cover story, she cut in. But this gives us the best chance of success. Thorn studied her, trying to reconcile the determined woman before him with the impulsive girl he'd known. You've thought this through. I've had 5 years to think about a lot of things, Thorn. There was something in her voice, a subtle undertone that suggested this plan wasn't entirely about the mission. But before he could pursue that thought, a notification chimed from her communications array. That's our first opportunity, she said, checking the message. Krell, the ALF's so-called military advisor, is hosting a gathering tomorrow night for supporters and sympathizers. I've already been invited. I can bring a guest, a special friend I'm working on. And you think they'll believe that I've suddenly switched sides? They'll believe that you've fallen for me, she said with surprising directness. Men with power often develop fascinations with exotic alien women. It's a weakness they'll understand. Thorn frowned. That's a lot of confidence in your persuasive abilities. Not just mine. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. You're not the first human officer to be turned by an attractive alien, and you won't be the last. It's almost a cliché. A cliché I never thought I'd be playing. Say no then, she challenged. Walk away. Report me if you like. But if you do, we lose our best chance at stopping whatever the Draconians are planning. Thorn knew she was manipulating him, using his sense of duty against him. But he also recognized the truth in her words. If the Draconians were involved, the situation was far more serious than a local insurgency. Fine, he said finally, but we do this my way. No unnecessary risks, no improvisation. We follow protocol. Relief flickered across her features, quickly masked. Of course, Commander. If we're supposed to be lovers, you should probably call me Rex, he said, the name feeling strange on his lips after years of being addressed by rank. Rex, she repeated, as if testing the sound. And you should call me Ionra. Ionra is for everyone else. Something in the way she said it, the distinction between her public persona and the name she was offering him, felt unexpectedly intimate. One more thing, he added. How exactly do you propose we make this relationship convincing? I doubt the Alf will take my word for it. Ionra stepped closer, her violet eyes intent on his. Leave that to me. By tomorrow night, half the colony will be talking about us. Before he could ask what she meant, she leaned forward and kissed him. A brief, light touch of her lips against his, but enough to send an unexpected jolt through his system. Consider that a preview, she murmured, drawing back. If we're going to be convincing, we should at least be comfortable with each other, don't you think? Thorn found himself at a rare loss for words, caught off guard not just by her actions, but by his response to them. This was not at all how he had expected his return to Ossian to go. Tomorrow night, she continued, apparently unaffected by the moment they'd just shared. I'll send a transport for you at 8. Dress civilian, nothing that screams military. Is that all? He managed, trying to regain his composure. For now. She walked him to the door. Thank you, Rex. I know this isn't what you signed up for. As he stepped out into the cool, desert night, Thorn couldn't shake the feeling that he had just committed to something far more complicated than a simple undercover operation. The woman he'd left behind 5 years ago had transformed into someone both familiar and utterly unknown, and he wasn't entirely sure which parts were real and which were carefully crafted personas. One thing was certain. Ionra Vental was no longer a child needing his protection. She was a force to be reckoned with, and potentially more dangerous than any draconian plot. The transport arrived precisely at 8 the following evening. Thorn had followed Ionra's instructions, dressing in civilian clothes that wouldn't attract undue attention. The vehicle took him not to Ionra's residence, as he had expected, but to one of the more upscale establishments in the colony, a restaurant and lounge frequented by both humans and affluent Axionites. Ionra was waiting at a corner table, dressed in a deep purple gown that complemented her violet eyes. Her silver-white hair cascaded freely down her back, and she wore jewelry made of local amber stones that caught the light with every movement. She looked, Thorn had to admit, stunning. As he approached, heads turned throughout the restaurant. He realized this was part of her strategy, being seen together in public, establishing the narrative she wanted people to believe. You're staring, she noted as he sat across from her. That's the point, isn't it? A small smile played at her lips. Among other things, throughout dinner, Ionra maintained a delicate balance. Professional enough when discussing the political situation to satisfy any eavesdroppers from the colonial administration, but with enough warmth and familiarity to fuel gossip about a budding romance. She touched his hand often during their conversation, leaned in close when speaking, and laughed at his sparse attempts at humor with a genuine delight that he found surprisingly gratifying. You're good at this, he observed during a lull in the conversation. At what? She asked innocently. Acting. Something flickered in her eyes, perhaps disappointment, perhaps amusement. Who says I'm acting? Before he could respond, she noticed someone across the room. Don't look now, but we have an audience. Naren, one of Krell's lieutenants, 2 tables back. Thorn resisted the urge to turn and look. Is that a problem? On the contrary, it's perfect. She leaned even closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. When we leave, I'm going to kiss you. Make it look good. The rest of the meal passed in a blur of tension and anticipation. When they finally rose to leave, Ionra moved around the table to his side. She slipped her arm through his, pressing close as they walked toward the exit. Just before they reached the door, she turned to him. Ready? She murmured. Without waiting for an answer, she slid her hands up to his shoulders, rose slightly on her toes, and kissed him. Unlike the brief touch from the night before, this was a real kiss, deep, lingering, and disturbingly convincing. Her body pressed against his, warm and pliant, and Thorne found himself responding automatically, his hands settling at her waist. When they broke apart, her eyes were slightly unfocused, her breathing uneven. For a moment, neither spoke. That should give them something to talk about, she finally said, her voice huskier than before. They left the restaurant in silence, the air between them charged with an unexpected tension. The transport took them away from the colony center toward the northern district where many ALF sympathizers lived. The gathering is at Krell's compound, Ionra explained, seemingly recovered from their moment at the restaurant. There will be about 30 people, mostly ALF supporters, but also some who are simply curious or seeking advantages. Krell will be watching you closely. Who exactly is this Krell? Thorne asked. Your intelligence mentioned him as a military advisor, but there's little concrete information. He appeared about 9 months ago, claiming to be a mercenary with experience in anti-colonial insurgencies on 5 different worlds. The truth is more concerning. She handed him a small data pad. These are image comparisons I've managed to compile. Krell is actually Drex Vaughn, special intelligence operative for the Draconian Empire. Thorne studied the images. The man known as Krell had altered his appearance, facial hair, different hairstyle, subtle cosmetic changes. But the core features matched those of Vaughn, a known operative whose name had appeared in intelligence briefings for years. If he's here personally, this is bigger than we thought, Thorne said grimly. Exactly. The question is, what are the Draconians planning that warrants sending someone of Vaughn's caliber? The transport slowed, approaching a large compound set apart from other residences. Guards, attempting to look like normal security but clearly military in their bearing, monitored the entrance. Follow my lead, Ionra murmured as they stepped out. Remember, you're intrigued by me, interested in my cause, but still cautious. A man being led by both his principles and his desires. That's quite a complex role, Thorne remarked dryly. You're a complex man, she replied with a hint of smile. Inside, the gathering was in full swing. The large central room of the compound was filled with people, humans and Axionites, plus a few representatives from other species. Servers circulated with drinks and food, and the atmosphere was one of casual opulence. Ionra kept her hand on Thorne's arm as she guided him through the crowd, introducing him to various people. Many seemed surprised to see a peacekeeper commander in their midst, but Ionra's presence and obvious attachment created a buffer of curiosity rather than hostility. Ionra, my dear, a deep voice called from across the room. I was beginning to think you wouldn't join us tonight. The speaker was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a neatly trimmed beard and penetrating green eyes. Despite his casual attire and friendly demeanor, Thorne recognized the predatory alertness in his posture. This was Drex Vaughn, going by the name Krell. I wouldn't miss it, Ionra replied warmly, leading Thorne toward him. Krell, I'd like you to meet Commander Thorne of the Peacekeeping Force. Commander, Vaughn's eyes narrowed slightly, though his smile remained in place. This is unexpected. The Peacekeepers aren't typically sympathetic to our gatherings. The commander is here as my guest, Ionra said, her tone intimate. He's interested in hearing perspectives beyond those offered by colonial administration. Indeed, Vaughn's gaze shifted between them, assessing. Well, any friend of Ionra's is welcome here, especially one who might be persuaded to see reason. I'm always interested in reason, Thorne replied neutrally, though I find it's often interpreted differently depending on who benefits. Vaughn laughed, a sound devoid of genuine amusement, diplomatic as well as handsome. I see why Ionra is taken with you. He turned to Ionra. You two make a striking couple. How long has this been going on? Not long, she answered, her hand sliding to Thorne's waist in a possessive gesture. But some connections are immediate, don't you find? Indeed, Vaughn's eyes lingered on her longer than was strictly polite. Though I would advise caution, my dear. Military men often have divided loyalties. I'm counting on it, she replied with a subtle emphasis that could be interpreted in multiple ways. The conversation continued, a delicate dance of innuendo and veiled meanings. Vaughn was too skilled to reveal anything substantive, but Thorne noted his particular interest in the colony's defense systems and the movement patterns of peacekeeper patrols. As the evening progressed, Thorne maintained his role as the intrigued but cautious officer, while Ionra played the passionate advocate trying to sway him to her cause. The physical intimacy between them, her touches, his protective posture, the way they leaned close to speak, created a believable narrative of attraction overriding professional boundaries. A word in private, Commander, Vaughn eventually suggested, gesturing toward a side room. I have something that might interest a man of your discerning tastes. Ionra squeezed Thorne's arm, a silent warning or encouragement, he wasn't sure which. Of course, Thorne agreed, following Vaughn into a smaller study lined with books and artifacts. Once the door closed behind them, Vaughn's demeanor shifted subtly, the congenial host replaced by something colder and more calculating. Let's speak plainly, Commander, he said, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. What exactly is your interest in our little movement? Or is it merely an interest in Ionra? Thorne accepted the offered drink, but didn't taste it. Both have their attractions. Honesty. Refreshing. Vaughn's smile didn't reach his eyes. Ionra is indeed extraordinary. Beautiful, intelligent, passionate about her cause. Many men have found themselves persuaded by such qualities. I wouldn't describe myself as persuaded, Thorne replied carefully. Intrigued, perhaps. And yet here you are, in the heart of what your superiors would consider enemy territory. Vaughn studied him. That suggests more than mere intrigue. Perhaps I'm tired of watching colonial policies destroy planets like this one. Perhaps I've seen enough conflicts to know that the established powers aren't always right. Thorne leaned forward slightly. Or perhaps I simply want to understand what I'm fighting against before I commit to fighting it. A pragmatist. I appreciate that. Vaughn set down his glass. Tell me, Commander, what would it take to turn intrigue into something more substantial? Resources? Information? A future beyond the constraints of the peacekeeping force? I'm not for sale, if that's what you're asking. Everyone has a price. The question is whether it's measured in credits, power, or... Vaughn's gaze shifted toward the door, other currencies. The implication was clear, and Thorne felt a surge of protective anger that wasn't entirely feigned. I'm here because Ionra asked me to be. That's enough for now. Unra. Vaughn raised an eyebrow. Not Ionra? How interesting. She must truly trust you to share her childhood name. Thorne silently cursed his slip. As I said, we have a connection. Evidently. Vaughn moved to a large desk and activated a holographic display. Perhaps you'd like to deepen that connection by joining us at a little gathering this weekend. Something more intimate than tonight's affair. My northern residents. A select few friends discussing the future of Ashian. The northern residents. Exactly where Ionra believed the Draconians had established their base of operations. I'd be interested, Thorne said carefully, though my schedule is subject to military obligations. Of course, Ionra can provide the details. Vaughn deactivated the display. I look forward to continuing our conversation, Commander. Men like us understand how the galaxy truly works beyond the platitudes of peace and cooperation. Men like us. Men who recognize that power, properly applied, is the only reality that matters. Vaughn smiled, cold and precise. The peacekeepers play at maintaining order, but they're merely preserving a system designed to benefit Earth and its core allies. The real future lies elsewhere. With the ALF. Vaughn laughed. The ALF is a means to an end, Commander. A useful tool. The future I speak of is much grander than the ambitions of a few disgruntled colonists. Before Thorne could press further, the door opened, and Ionra entered. There you are, she said, her tone deliberately light. I was beginning to think Krell had kidnapped you. Merely getting acquainted with your new friend, Vaughn replied smoothly. The commander is quite intriguing. I've invited you both to the northern house this weekend. How wonderful. Ionra moved to Thorn's side, slipping her arm through his with practiced familiarity. I've been hoping you two would find common ground. The rest of the evening passed without incident, though Thorn remained acutely aware of Vaughn's calculating gaze following them. When they finally departed, Ionra maintained their pretense until they were safely back in her transport. That was dangerous, she said as soon as the doors closed. Vaughn is no fool. He'll be investigating your background thoroughly after tonight. My cover will hold, Thorn assured her. And we got what we wanted, an invitation to the northern compound. Yes, but at what cost? She looked troubled. Vaughn seemed very interested in you. Too interested. Isn't that the point? To make it believe I could be turned? There's a difference between being seen as potentially sympathetic and being viewed as a high-value recruitment target. Her voice had an edge of genuine concern. The more valuable he thinks you are, the more dangerous our position becomes. They rode in silence for a moment, the implications hanging between them. You call me Ionra, she said suddenly, during your conversation with him. Thorn winced. I caught that slip too. I'm sorry. Don't be. It actually helps our cover. A faint smile touched her lips. It suggests a level of intimacy that's convincing. The transport slowed, approaching Thorn's temporary quarters rather than Ionra's residence. We shouldn't be seen returning to the same location, she explained. It's too early in our relationship for that to seem natural. And what happens now, he asked. Now we continue the charade. Public appearances, meetings where we're seen together, building the narrative. She hesitated, then added, you should stay at my place tomorrow night. People will be watching, and we need to be convincing. The implications of her statement weren't lost on him. That's taking the cover pretty far. This isn't a game, Thorn. Vaughn will have people monitoring us to verify our story. If we're not thorough, we're dead. Her expression was deadly serious. I'm not asking you to actually sleep with me, just to maintain the appearance that you are. Put that way, it was hard to argue with her logic, though Thorn found himself unexpectedly troubled by the clinical way she discussed their pretend intimacy. Fine, he agreed, but we need to establish clear boundaries. Always the professional, she murmured, though whether with approval or disappointment, he couldn't tell. Get some rest, Commander. Tomorrow will be a busy day. As predicted, the next day brought increased scrutiny. Thorn noticed the subtle surveillance, the same faces appearing too frequently, communications being monitored, colleagues making casual inquiries about his new friend. He played his part, neither confirming nor denying the rumors, but allowing a calculated hint of distraction to suggest a man preoccupied with personal matters. That evening, he arrived at Ionra's residence with a small bag, ostensibly containing overnight necessities. She greeted him with a kiss that would have looked passionate to any observers, then quickly guided him inside. We're being watched, she confirmed once the door was secure. Vaughn has assigned at least 2 surveillance teams. Flattering. It's standard procedure for him. She moved to her security console, activating additional countermeasures. He's paranoid, but not without reason. The northern compound has been buzzing with activity for the past month. Whatever they're planning is accelerating. Thorn set down his bag. What exactly do you think they're building up there? I'm not certain, but data suggests some kind of gravity manipulation device. The power requirements are enormous, and they've been importing specialized shielding materials that are typically used for containing gravitational fields. Weapon or transportation technology? Potentially both, or something worse. She pulled up a series of geological surveys on her display. The northern compound is situated directly above a major fault line. If they were to destabilize it, they could trigger planetary-scale destruction. Thorn finished grimly. But why? What's the strategic value in destabilizing Ashian? It might be a test run, proof of concept before deploying the technology elsewhere. Ionra's expression was troubled, or it could be more targeted. The main human settlement is built on an extension of the same fault system. The implications were chilling. If the Draconians could selectively trigger geological disasters, they'd have a weapon of terrifying potential, one that could eliminate enemies while appearing to be natural catastrophes. We need to get into that compound, Thorn said. Not just for the weekend gathering, but full access to whatever they're building. Agreed. But that's easier said than done. Security will be tight, and Vaughn is already suspicious. Ionra hesitated, then added, "There's something else. I received intelligence that they're accelerating their timeline. The device may be operational within days, not weeks as I previously estimated. Then we move now, tonight." "That's suicide," she objected. "We need more intelligence, more preparation. What we need is to stop that device before it's activated." Thorne began pacing, his military mind already formulating strategies. "The weekend gathering will be too late." "Then what do you suggest?" "We can't just knock on the door." "No, but we can create a distraction that gets us inside." He turned to her. "Do you trust your contacts in the ALF?" "The genuine rebels, not Vaughn's people." "Some of them, yes." "Why?" "Because we're going to need their help to stage an insurgent attack on the compound, one that will draw out security while we slip inside." Ionra looked skeptical. "That's incredibly risky, and it would likely result in casualties among the ALF members. Not if we coordinate properly. A feint, not a real attack." He could see the wheels turning in her mind as she considered the possibility. "It's our best chance, Ionra. If that device activates, the casualties will be in the thousands, not dozens." She was silent for a long moment, weighing their options. "I can contact Commander Sella. She's never trusted Vaughn, and she has enough influence with the moderate ALF factions to organize something. Can she be ready by tomorrow night?" "Possibly, if I reach her immediately." Ionra moved to her secure communications array. "But Thorne, if this goes wrong, then we'll have tried," he said simply. "Sometimes that's all we can do." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, a shared resolve. In that moment, the pretense of their relationship seemed to fall away, replaced by the genuine connection of two people facing impossible odds together. "Make the call," he said softly. As Ionra established contact with Commander Sella, Thorne began formulating the details of their infiltration plan. They would need equipment, access codes, and most importantly, a way to disable the gravity device once they found it. The hours passed in a blur of preparation. Thorne contacted Major Foster, his most trusted subordinate, with coded instructions to have a strike team on standby without revealing their true mission. Ionra worked with her ALF contacts to arrange the diversionary attack, carefully planning it to minimize risk while creating maximum distraction. As dawn approached, they finally paused, exhausted but prepared. "You should rest," Ionra told him, gesturing to the couch where she'd placed blankets and a pillow. "Tomorrow will require all our strength." "What about you?" "I'll sleep later. I need to finish coordinating with Sella." Thorne could see the fatigue in her eyes, despite her attempts to hide it. "Ionra," he said quietly, "we both need to be at our best tomorrow. A few hours of rest, now, could make the difference between success and failure." She sighed, relenting. "You're right. I'll just send one final message and join you." "Join me?" A hint of her earlier playfulness returned. "On the couch, Commander. It's quite large, and I promise to stay on my side." True to her word, Ionra kept a respectful distance when she finally laid down on the opposite end of the couch. But as the hours passed, exhaustion overcame propriety. Thorne awoke briefly to find her curled against him, her silver-white hair spread across his chest, her breathing deep and even. He should have moved away, maintained the professional distance he'd insisted on. Instead, he found himself adjusting his position to make her more comfortable, his arms settling around her shoulders with a naturalness that surprised him. In the vulnerability of sleep, with her usual masks and defenses lowered, he could still see traces of the earnest girl who had followed him through the marketplace 5 years ago. But now that youthful determination was tempered by experience, shaped into something formidable and compelling. As he drifted back to sleep, Thorne admitted to himself what he'd been trying to deny since seeing her again. Their pretend relationship wasn't entirely pretense, at least not on his part. And that realization was more dangerous than any draconian weapon. They rose at midday, moving with the quiet efficiency of people accustomed to high-stakes missions. The plan was set. Commander Sella's ALF faction would launch a diversionary attack on the northern compound's main gate at sunset, drawing security forces away from the eastern perimeter. Meanwhile, Thorn and Ionra would infiltrate through a service entrance, using access codes Ionra had obtained from her intelligence network. Once we're inside, Thorn reviewed as they checked their equipment. We locate the central control room, disable the device, and extract with evidence of draconian involvement. And if we encounter Vaughn, we avoid him if possible. If not, Thorn checked the charge on his blaster. We do what's necessary. Ionra nodded grimly. He won't be taken alive. You should know that. Draconian intelligence operatives are conditioned to resist capture. I'm counting on it, Thorn replied, his voice harder than she'd heard before. Men like Vaughn don't stop unless they're stopped permanently. As the twin suns began their descent toward the horizon, they made final preparations. Both wore dark, utilitarian clothing that would allow them to move silently and blend with shadows. They carried minimal equipment, weapons, small explosive for the gravity device, and communication devices linked to both Commander Sella's forces and Thorn's standby team. Ready? Thorn asked as they prepared to depart. Ionra checked her weapon one last time, then looked up at him with a determination that matched his own. I've been ready for 5 years. There was something in her voice, a personal stake beyond the mission, that caught his attention. This isn't about proving yourself to me, Ionra. It never was. Isn't it? A sad smile touched her lips. Perhaps not entirely. But I'd be lying if I said that day, when you told me to come back when I was older, didn't change the course of my life. Before he could respond, her communication device signaled. Sella's forces are in position, she reported after checking the message. The diversion begins in 30 minutes. The moment for personal revelations had passed. They moved into action, taking Ionra's transport to a location near the compound, but far enough away to avoid detection. From there, they proceeded on foot, using the rugged terrain to conceal their approach. The northern compound was larger than Thorn had expected, a sprawling complex of buildings nestled against the foothills of Ashian's mountain range. From their vantage point, they could see the main structure, a massive dome surrounded by smaller outbuildings and a perimeter wall patrolled by armed guards. The service entrance is on the eastern side, Ionra whispered, pointing to a less conspicuous gate. 2 guards rotated hourly. In the control room, intelligence suggests it's within the central dome, likely underground for additional shielding. They waited in tense silence as the minutes ticked by. Finally, a series of explosions erupted at the main gate, Sella's forces beginning their diversionary attack. Alarms blared, and they watched as guards rushed toward the disturbance, exactly as planned. Now, Thorn signaled, and they moved swiftly toward the eastern entrance. The remaining guards were alert, but distracted by the commotion at the main gate. Ionra approached first, using her diplomatic credentials and a well-rehearsed story about an urgent meeting with Krell. The ruse, combined with the chaos of the attack, got them through the initial checkpoint. Inside, they moved with purposeful confidence, as if they belonged. Ionra led the way, having memorized what little was known of the compound's layout. They encountered few personnel. Most had been drawn to the ongoing skirmish at the perimeter. There, Ionra whispered, indicating a heavily secured door at the end of a corridor. That should lead to the lower levels. Using the access codes she'd acquired, they bypassed the security locks and entered a stairwell, descending deep below the surface. The temperature dropped noticeably as they descended, and a low, persistent hum became increasingly audible, the sound of enormous power generators. At the bottom of the stairwell, they encountered another security door, this one more sophisticated than the last. Ionra's codes failed to grant access. Plan B, Thorn murmured, pulling out a specialized device designed to bypass electronic locks. It would take time they might not have, as the diversion at the gate wouldn't last forever. As Thorn worked on the lock, Ionra kept watch, her weapon ready. Hurry, she urged. We don't know how long Sella can maintain the distraction. After what seemed like an eternity, the lock yielded with a soft click. They entered cautiously, finding themselves in a vast underground chamber dominated by an imposing apparatus at its center. The gravity device was unlike anything Thorn had seen before, a complex array of interlocking rings surrounding a pulsating core of energy, all suspended above a circular platform. Technicians moved around it, monitoring readings and making adjustments, their focus absolute. "We need a diversion here too," Thorne whispered. "Something to clear the room without damaging the device before we can study it." Ionra nodded, then did something unexpected. She stumbled into the chamber, appearing disoriented and frightened. "Help!" she called out, her voice convincingly panicked. "There's been a breach at the surface. Rebels have broken through the northern perimeter." The technicians looked up in alarm, several immediately rushing toward the exit to verify her claims. In the confusion, Thorne slipped inside, keeping to the shadows as he made his way toward the main control console. "Who are you?" demanded one of the remaining technicians, approaching Ionra suspiciously. "This is a restricted area. Special attaché to Krell," she replied, producing her identification. "He sent me to check on the device's status with the attack underway." The technician hesitated, clearly unsure whether to believe her. "I wasn't informed. Communications are compromised," she interrupted. "That's why I was sent in person." While she kept the technician distracted, Thorne reached the control console and began downloading data, simultaneously assessing the device's vulnerabilities. The technology was more advanced than even Ionra's intelligence had suggested, capable of generating localized gravitational distortions of enormous power, focused specifically on the fault line beneath the human colony. "We need to shut it down," he muttered, searching for the primary power couplings. A slow clap echoed through the chamber. "Impressive," said a familiar voice. "Though I expected you'd try something like this." Drex Vaughn emerged from a side entrance, a blaster aimed casually at Ionra. Two armed guards flanked him, their weapons trained on Thorne. "Did you really think I wouldn't recognize a galactic security operative when I saw one?" Vaughn asked, addressing Ionra. "You were good, I'll grant you that, but not quite good enough." Ionra's expression remained defiant. "Good enough to find your little earthquake machine." "Earthquake?" Vaughn laughed. "Oh, my dear, this is so much more than that. This device can destabilize tectonic plates with pinpoint accuracy. Today, a colonial settlement. Tomorrow, perhaps capital city on Earth itself. Untraceable, unstoppable, and completely deniable." "What?" Thorne demanded, his mind racing to find a way out of their predicament. "What does Draconian gain from destabilizing this sector?" "Chaos, Commander. Beautiful, productive chaos." Vaughn's smile was chilling. "When major powers are busy responding to natural disasters across dozens of worlds, they have less capacity to notice other, more important moves being made elsewhere." He gestured to the guards. "Secure them. We'll need to adjust our timeline now, but perhaps that's for the best. Our test subject can be the peacekeeping force headquarters instead of the entire colony. A more precise demonstration of our capabilities." As the guards moved to restrain them, Thorne caught Ionra's eye. A silent communication passed between them, an understanding built over their short but intense partnership. "Now!" Thorne shouted, dropping to the floor as Ionra drew her concealed second weapon and fired rapidly at the guards. Chaos erupted in the chamber. Thorne rolled behind a console for cover, drawing his own blaster. Vaughn ducked behind the gravity device, returning fire while shouting orders to activate emergency protocols. The remaining technicians scrambled for safety or weapons, adding to the confusion. Alarms blared as the gravity device's protective systems detected the threat, automatic shields beginning to deploy around its core. "We need to plant the charges before those shields fully activate." Thorne called to Ionra, who was pinned down by fire from one of the guards. "Cover me," she replied, already reaching for the explosive devices in her pack. Thorne laid down suppressive fire, forcing Vaughn and the guards to take cover. Ionra seized the opportunity, darting toward the device with explosive charges in hand. She had almost reached it when Vaughn emerged from his position, his blaster aimed directly at her. "Stop right there," he commanded. "One more step, and I fire." Ionra froze, calculating her odds. The distance was too great. She'd never reach him before he could pull the trigger. "Drop the explosives," Vaughn ordered. Slowly, with seemingly no choice, Ionra complied, carefully setting the charges on the floor. Now back away, Vaughn continued, his weapon unwavering. This device is activating in 5 minutes, with or without your cooperation. What happened next occurred so rapidly that Thorn would later struggle to recall the exact sequence of events. Ionra appeared to stumble as she backed away, dropping to one knee. Vaughn, momentarily distracted by her movement, didn't notice Thorn's position shift. In that split second of inattention, Thorn fired 3 rapid shots, not at Vaughn, but at the power couplings he'd identified earlier. The bolts hit their mark, causing a cascade of sparks and an ominous powering down sound from the gravity device. Vaughn roared with fury, turning his weapon toward Thorn, and that was when Ionra made her move. In one fluid motion, she scooped up the explosives, rolled forward, and slapped them onto the device's now exposed core housing. "No!" Vaughn shouted, realizing too late what was happening. He fired wildly, a shot grazing Ionra's shoulder as she scrambled away from the device. Thorn returned fire, forcing Vaughn to take cover once more. Charges set. Ionra called, her voice tight with pain. 30 seconds. Thorn fought his way to her side, supporting her as they made for the exit. The remaining guard tried to intercept them, but fell to Thorn's precise shot. "Stop them," Vaughn commanded, emerging from cover with rage distorting his features. The device can still be saved, but it was too late. Even as technicians rushed to disarm the explosives, the countdown reached 0. The detonation wasn't as dramatic as Thorn had expected, a controlled, concentrated blast designed to destroy critical components rather than create a massive explosion. The effect, however, was immediate. The gravity device's core collapsed in on itself, the interlocking rings falling like massive dominoes as support systems failed catastrophically. In the ensuing chaos, Thorn and Ionra made it to the stairwell, sealing the door behind them. They could hear Vaughn's enraged shouts as they ascended, knowing he would be in pursuit as soon as he recovered from the initial shock of failure. "Can you make it?" Thorn asked, noting the blood seeping through Ionra's jacket where the blaster bolt had struck her. "I've had worse," she replied through gritted teeth. "Just keep moving." They emerged into a compound in disarray. The diversionary attack, combined with the explosion below, had created widespread confusion. Alarms blared from multiple directions, and personnel ran about with little coordination or purpose. Taking advantage of the chaos, they made their way toward the eastern perimeter, avoiding direct confrontation where possible. Thor maintained contact with his strike team, directing them to secure an extraction route. They had almost reached the perimeter when a shot rang out behind them. Thorn felt the heat of a blaster bolt pass inches from his head. "Did you think I'd let you escape that easily?" Vaughn's voice called from behind them. He stood 20 meters away, his weapon raised, his once immaculate appearance now disheveled with dust and rage. 5 years of planning, destroyed in minutes. For that, you die slowly. He fired again, forcing them behind a storage container for cover. "Go," Thorn told Ionra, checking the charge on his blaster. "I'll hold him off, give you time to reach the extraction point." "Not a chance," she replied fiercely. "We finish this together." Before he could argue, she leaned out from cover and fired several shots, forcing Vaughn to retreat momentarily. "He's mine," she said, her eyes blazing with determination. "He represents everything I've fought against for 5 years." Thorn recognized the personal stake in her voice. This wasn't just about the mission anymore. "Then we take him together. On 3. They coordinated their attack, emerging from opposite sides of the container in a pincer movement that caught Vaughn by surprise. Despite his skills, he couldn't cover both angles at once. Ionra's shot struck first, hitting him in the shoulder and spinning him halfway around. Thorn's follow-up blast should have been fatal, but Vaughn somehow managed to twist away at the last moment, the bolt only grazing his side. Wounded but far from defeated, Vaughn returned fire with desperate intensity. A shot caught Thorn in the leg, sending him crashing to the ground, his weapon skittering away. "Thorn!" Ionra cried out, momentarily distracted. Vaughn seized the opportunity, charging toward her with unexpected speed. Before she could bring her weapon to bear, He crashed into her, sending them both tumbling to the ground. In the struggle that followed, Ionra lost her grip on her blaster. Vaughn, despite his injuries, had the advantage of size and strength. He pinned her down, his hands reaching for her throat. "You could have been so much more," he snarled, his face inches from hers. A woman of her talents, wasted on loyalty to a dying system. Ionra fought desperately against his grip, but she could feel her strength fading as his fingers tightened around her throat. Then, suddenly, Vaughn's expression changed from rage to shock. His grip loosened, and he looked down in disbelief at the small vibroblade protruding from his chest, the concealed weapon Ionra had kept as a last resort, now buried between his ribs. "You're right," she gasped as he collapsed sideways. "I could have been more. I chose to be better." Vaughn's eyes remained open, fixed on her with final hatred, but the life had already faded from them. Ionra pushed his body away, struggling to her feet. She rushed to Thorn's side, examining his wound with trembling hands. "It's not deep," he assured her, though the pain in his voice belied his words. "Missed the artery." She tore a strip from her jacket, binding the wound tightly. "Can you walk?" "With help," he admitted. She supported him as they made their final push toward the perimeter, where Thorn's extraction team was now engaged with the compound's remaining security forces. Commander Sella's Alpha faction, having completed their diversionary role, had withdrawn to minimize casualties as planned. The extraction was chaotic but successful. Within minutes, they were aboard a peacekeeper transport, medical personnel attending to their wounds as they lifted off from the embattled compound. As the adrenaline of combat faded, the full impact of what they'd accomplished began to sink in. They had disrupted a draconian plot that could have destabilized the entire sector, eliminated a high-ranking enemy operative, and gathered intelligence that would prove invaluable in countering future threats. But as Thorn looked at Ionra, being treated for her shoulder wound across from him, he realized that the mission's success wasn't what mattered most to him in that moment. "You came back," he said quietly. She looked up, her violet eyes meeting his. "I told you I would. When I said those words 5 years ago, I never expected." He trailed off, unsure how to express the complexity of what had developed between them. "Expected what?" she prompted. "That I'd actually listen? That I'd become someone you couldn't dismiss? That I'd regret not seeing who you already were," he finished. "I was wrong, Ionra. Not about you being young, but about what that meant. I saw inexperience and mistook it for incapability." A small smile touched her lips despite her pain. "Well, I was inexperienced, and I probably would have gotten myself killed if you'd let me tag along back then. Maybe, or maybe you would have surprised me then as much as you have now." Their conversation was interrupted by the transport's pilot announcing their approach to the main colony. The aftermath of their mission would require debriefings, reports, and careful management of the political implications. The draconian involvement would need to be exposed in a way that didn't trigger wider conflict, while still ensuring they couldn't simply try again elsewhere. All of that lay ahead, but for now, they had a moment of peace, a rare commodity in their line of work. "What happens next?" Thorn asked, the question encompassing far more than just the mission's aftermath. Ionra's gaze held his, steady and certain. "I think that depends on you, Commander. I've always been clear about what I wanted. Have you? Because our entire relationship has been a cover story," he pointed out. "An act for Vaughn's benefit." "Was it?" she challenged. "All of it. Every moment." The question hung between them, demanding honesty. Thorn thought back to their first kiss at the restaurant, to the night they'd spent on her couch, to the silent communication that had saved their lives in the compound. None of those moments had felt like mere pretense. "No," he admitted finally. "Not all of it." She reached across the space between them, her hand finding his. "Then that's where we start. With what's real." 1 year later, the twin amber moons of Ashian cast their glow over a transformed landscape. The human colony and Axionite settlements had begun the long process of integration, guided by the terms of a peace treaty that granted equal rights and representation to all inhabitants. The draconian plot, once exposed, had led to diplomatic sanctions and increased vigilance throughout the sector. The gravity manipulation technology, while not completely destroyed, had been set back by years, if not decades. On a balcony overlooking the desert, Rex Thorne, now serving as ambassador rather than commander, watched the sunset with a contentment he had never expected to find. The scars from their mission had healed, though he still walked with a slight limp on cold mornings. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Ionra said, joining him at the railing. "Hard to believe there was almost a war here. There's still much to be done," he reminded her, though without the grimness that would once have accompanied such an observation. "There always is." She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "But for once, I think we're ahead of the crisis rather than chasing it." Thorne turned to face her, taking her hands in his. In the years since their mission, their relationship had evolved from the pretense of their cover story to something genuine and profound. They had learned each other's truths, confronted their pasts, and built something neither had believed possible. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small box from his pocket. Ionra's eyes widened as he opened it to reveal a ring, a band of earth gold interwoven with Ashian silver, set with a small amber stone that caught the light of the setting suns. "It's not traditional by either of our culture's standards," he admitted. "But then, neither are we." "Are you asking me something, Ambassador?" she teased, though her voice trembled slightly. "I'm asking if you'll marry me," he said simply. "If you'll continue proving me wrong about what's possible between worlds, between people who are different in every way except the ones that matter." Tears shimmered in her violet eyes, but her smile was radiant. "I've spent 5 years becoming the kind of woman you couldn't say no to. It seems only fair that I say yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Thorne reflected on the strange path that had led them here, from a dusty marketplace encounter to a bond that transcended worlds. The girl who had followed him through the streets had indeed come back when she was older, but she had brought with her so much more than he could have imagined. And as the twin moons rose fully into the night sky, casting their amber light over the reunited world below, Rex Thorne and Ionra Vin Tal sealed their future with a kiss that needed no pretense, no audience, and no explanation beyond the simple truth of what they had found in each other.